top of the line Sony receiver from 1972 to 1974 was the STR-7065. The top of the line Onkyo receiver from 1976 to 1977 was the TX-8500. And the top of the line Pioneer receiver from 1978 to 1980 was the 270 watt SX-1980, which I don't have. But I do have a Pioneer SX-1280. At any other time, the 185 watt 1280 would have been the top of the line. In the prior generation, the 50 series, Pioneer topped out at the 1250, which was only 160 watts. But with the 80 series, Pioneer went back crazy and released the insanity known as the 1980. It was 270 watts. It was the pinnacle of engineering. It weighed 78 pounds and had a retail price of $1,295. This thing now sells for anywhere between $6 and $11 grand, or basically the price of a 10-year-old Jeep Cherokee, which means most people will never acquire one. So when I advertised this video as being the comparison of 3 top-of-the-line receivers, I lied. But not by much. The SX-1280 in any other year would have been Pioneer's top-of-the-line receiver, because it is literally the second biggest 70s era receiver Pioneer made. So now that you know the truth, let's get started. The Sony STR-7065 was made from 1972 to 1974 and had a suggested retail price of $550. At 65 watts, this was the highest watted Sony receiver at the time. While 65 watts isn't that high compared to what would soon follow, in the early 70s this wattage was comparable to other manufacturers' top-of-the-line models. I always liked the look of this era of Sony's. I would use one word to describe them: classy. With the wood case, green lettering, symmetrical front, they epitomize what an early 70s receiver should look like. So probably the least classy thing about this receiver is this balance control. It's this little plastic knob that sits underneath here. Not a big fan, but you got 3 speaker outputs. You got bass and treble, which you can do individually for your left and your right. High and low filter, loudness, FM muting. You have this switch here, which allows you to listen to stereo or just left or just right, or reverse, which will take your left and your right and swap them around, which is nice if you try to keep all your left channels to one side and all your right channels to the other side on, you know, all sorts of stereos that are all wired up to the exact same set of speakers through all these switches. It's nice to not have those things be backwards, so if I did wire this one different from the rest, I could just flip it to reverse. If all these stereos had that, it would be much easier for me. You got 1 aux, 1 phono, 2 tape inputs. You have a microphone input here on the front and this mic mixing knob. I couldn't have even told you that was there. I can't imagine why anyone in today's world would use that. Not sure why anyone in 1973 used it, but anyway, it's there. Nice looking receiver. The Onkyo TX-8500 was Onkyo's top-of-the-line receiver in 1976 and 1977. It's had a top-of lineup that included the TX-1500, 2500, 4500, and 8500. At 110 watts, it was twice as powerful as their second highest unit, the 55-watt TX-4500. It retailed for $700, which is around $4,000 in today's money. So here we have the Onkyo TX-8500. You can see we got tinted glass, signal and tuning meters, bunch of lights for your different functions. But going through the knobs here, we got 3 speaker outputs, bass, mid, and treble controls. So that's nice. Balance, high-low filters. You got a muting button to basically quiet the amp down if, let's say, the phone were to ring or something like that. You got 3 tape and 2 phono inputs. You'll notice I had to put stickers on here because the lettering, you can see, just rubs off something fierce on these Onkyos. Probably one of their biggest downsides. They all sound good and look good. So there you have your Onkyo TX-8500. So here we have the SX-1280. We got 3 speaker outputs. We got dual bass and treble controls. So you can really fine tune this thing. You can turn them all on or off. High, low filters, some FM functions that I don't care about. 2 tape inputs, 2 phono inputs. We have this phono cartridge setting for phono 1 where you can match the capacitance with your cartridge. We got signal and tuning meters and power meters and blue lights in there. Looks pretty nice. you saw my previous video that included the SX1280, you heard me rant about how heavy it is. It is still insanely heavy. I'm going to put the weights on the screen. The Onkyo is really heavy too. The Sony weighs nothing compared to these two, even though I'm sure the Sony is heavier than most receivers. These other two are just crazy heavy. So here we have all three together. The Sony's got the smaller glass, but I like the look, even though it's not as dramatic. It doesn't light the room up as much. The Onkyo's got that tinted glass, and then the Pioneer with the blue lights, boy, that really shines. It's got those power meters too. As far as functions that you would still use today, the difference is here we got 4 tone controls on the Pioneer, 3 on the Onkyo, and then just 2 on the Sony. The Sony only has 1 phono input. The other 2 have 2 phono inputs, so that's your biggest difference in functionality. So here we have the back of all 3 of them. The biggest difference is going to be the speaker terminals. The Pioneer and the Onkyo have spring-loaded speaker terminals. The Sony just has the screw heads. Not a big fan of those, but this was from the early 70s. They all 3 have the ability to isolate the preamp from the power amp. The Sony here does it with this switch, and you turn that, and then that separates them, and then you access them there. The Onkyo has these coded jumpers, and then the Pioneer has those, so you can access the preamp and the power amp separately on all 3 of these. As far as cases go, you have wood veneer for all of them. Very nice looking wood cases. You got these giant radiator fins to disperse the heat. That is on the Pioneer, but top of the line receivers do get nice looking cases. So here we got all 3. We got the Onkyo on the left, Pioneer in the middle, Sony on the right. Let's start over here with the Onkyo. You got 2 transformers, 1 for each channel. So it is truly a dual unit. A lot jammed in here. Very heavy, very high quality build. Pioneer, gigantic dual winding transformer. Again, 1 for each channel. The Sony does not have that. It just has 1. It's just a good sized transformer. I want to point out this unit's been totally recapped. New transistors in the preamp. Everything in the preamp's new because it has a hiss that I can hear when I have the volume turned up and there's no music playing. I tried to get rid of it, couldn't. But this one has had its preamp all rebuilt. The hiss is still there. I don't think it's going to affect the performance too much. But anyway, you can see that that Sony is a decent size smaller than these other ones. So I want to mention something about the Sony. Underneath the wood case, it has this metal case. And so when you unscrew it, the wood case comes off. But the wood case is not a truly solid built piece like, say, that Onkyo or most other ones. It is 3 individual pieces that is meant to come apart, and they're held together with these little plastic clips. Let me take this end off and I'll show you. So how Sony built it was 3 separate pieces, and you snap them apart, and they're held together with these little white pegs, and they go into these little white holes. No big deal, but every time I take this thing off, it wants to fall apart in my hands. And this time I just did that, it started to fall apart in my hands. That fell off and I dropped it. This part was still connected, and it hit the ground and sheared off all the little pegs. So all the little pegs are now broken off into those holes and broken off of here. And I will never be able... So I have blue lights in the Sony. The meters are green. That means they have white lights in them. I put blue ones in there, but it didn't change the color. So the white lights in the meters, all I got to do is get in there. There are clip style, like the fuse style lights go in there, and a fuse style down there. Down there, pretty easy, no soldering. You just got to unscrew the little component there to get into it. So fuse style in the Sony. Pioneer has the best lights for replacing. It is just these sockets right here. Man, all you gotta do is take the case off, pop them right in. It's as easy as changing a light bulb in your house. We're going 3 for 3 on easiness. The Onkyo is pretty easy too. It has fuse style ones on the back side of these boards here. All you gotta do is take off these screws, lift the board out, pop the fuse style ones in. You're good to go. Not bad. So for this comparison, I did things a little differently. Normally I can listen to any of these 16 stereos and pick out 2 of them and compare them to one another through various switches and knobs that I have in here. But today, since these are top-of-the-line receivers, I thought I would do things a little differently. My normal speakers in here are the Klipsch RP8000Fs. These are actually good speakers, actually very good speakers. But since I'm doing top-of-the-line receivers today, I thought it deserved great speakers. And these are great speakers. These are the Klipsch Forte 4s. Top-of-the-line receivers deserve these speakers. They sound amazing. They got great bass. They got a passive radiator in the back. Fill the whole house up with music. Top-of-the-line receivers deserve these. So I had to carry all 3 of these up a flight of stairs, and I am now positive that every time a human being has ever picked up an SX1280, they have uttered the sentence, "Holy shit, this thing is heavy." So for this comparison, I listened to 3 very well-produced songs: Gold on the Ceiling by the Black Keys, Learning to Fly by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and Saturday Night's Alright by Elton John. I streamed the songs to 2 receivers at the same time, and then switched the speakers back and forth using the Duke audio switch. I did not listen to AM, FM, did not listen to the phono input, and I had the loudness control turned on. So first up, we have the Onkyo TX8500 and the Pioneer SX1280. I listened to these 3 songs multiple times and a handful of other songs, all in an effort to hear a difference between these 2, and I could not hear much of a difference. I thought maybe the Onkyo had a little better bottom end, but just really so minor. So I recorded me saying that, and after a while I decided, am I doing a disservice by playing them on the Fortes in that big room, which sounds really, really good up there, but is that covering up some of the differences? You know, I thought it would bring out the differences, but well, so I hauled them back down here to the basement, played them on the Klipsch RP8000Fs, and the couch sits much closer. It's got carpet. It's an 8-foot ceiling instead of a 9-foot ceiling, and here I could hear the difference. It's just amazing, but anyway, that's how it works. I guess my disclaimer that I show that yeah, the rooms matter and speakers matter, well, that's proof right here inside this house. I can not hear a difference upstairs and hear a difference downstairs, and the difference I'm hearing in these is the Onkyo has a deeper, better bass. You can feel it. You can hear it in certain parts of the song. For example, on the Elton John song, there's a bass line that, you know, he's plucking along, and on the Onkyo, man, you can just follow, close your eyes, and you can just hear it. You switch over the Pioneer, and it kind of, it's there, but it melds into all the other instruments. It's not nearly as defined. So defined, deeper bass, you know, by a hair on the Onkyo. And you could go onto the treble and bass controls on the Pioneer and adjust them and get it to sound like the Onkyo, and I did, and then I adjusted the Onkyo, and then went back and forth. So 12 o'clock positions on all these things, and it doesn't necessarily mean the Onkyo is a superior unit. It just means that at the 12 o'clock positions, you're gonna get more bass in my room with my speakers, and I prefer the more bass. So I'm giving the Elton John and the Black Keys song to the Onkyo. I'm gonna call the Tom Petty song a draw, simply because there's not a whole lot of bass there, and switching back and forth, there was only a minor difference. So anyway, that's that. So next up, we have the Onkyo TX8500 and the Sony STR7065. And no, these 2 do not sound the same. The Sony is not a clone of the Onkyo at all. The biggest difference here is the bass. The Sony is a bass fiend. This might be one of the deepest receivers I have ever owned. It goes way deep, deeper than the Onkyo. Now the Onkyo's got great bass, by the way, but it's unprecedented bass in the Sony, and that can come at a cost. For example, on the Gold on the Ceiling and the chorus, there are hand claps going on, and they are just more clear and pronounced in the Onkyo. And on a song like Saturday Night's Alright, there are some other instruments that may be getting a little overwhelmed by the bass. Honestly though, in a song like Learning to Fly, that is not a bass-heavy song. It is a relatively thin song, and the Sony gives it a lot more fullness and a lot more oomph. So it may come down to your own personal preference and the individual song. Here, I'm going to give Learning to Fly to the Sony and give the other 2 songs to the Onkyo. Again, it's going to come down to your personal preference, but the Sony has got bass. So finally, we have the Pioneer SX1280 and the Sony STR7065. since the Pioneer and the Onkyo sound the same, these are going to be the exact same results as when I compared the Sony to the Onkyo. The Sony's got that deeper bass. Maybe the highs are a little more clear and a little more bright in the Pioneer than they are in the Sony, but same sound stage, same instrument separation, just really that bass being thicker and deeper. So I'm going to have the exact same results here. I'm going to give the Tom Petty song to the Sony and the Black Keys and the Elton John song to the Pioneer. So as always, I get a second opinion from my wife, Laura, who listened to these. And when she listened to the Onkyo and the Pioneer upstairs on the Forte 4s, she concluded that they were the same. There was no difference. Same as me, and she did not know what I had already concluded. After I brought them down here and she listened to them on the Klipsch RP8000Fs on a much closer listening area, she preferred the Pioneer on the Black Keys and the Tom Petty song, and preferred the Onkyo on the Elton John song. She did agree that the Onkyo had more of a bass presence down here, but on those first two songs, she did prefer the Pioneer for its what she thought was better highs, more clear, more crisp. On the Elton John song, she picked the Onkyo because she thought that there was some instruments not coming all the way through on the Pioneer that were coming through on the Onkyo. And I bet it was that bass line I mentioned earlier. And then when it came to the Sony, she basically had the same conclusion as me. Sony had really super deep bass and preferred the Sony on that Tom Petty song, but preferred the Onkyo and the Pioneer on all the rest of the songs. So to summarize, all three of these are great receivers. They all have great sound stage, great instrument separation. They're very similar in that regards. The Pioneer and the Onkyo hardly have any differences at all, depending on what room and what speakers you're using. The Sony has the much deeper bass, and you're going to hear that bass no matter what speakers you're playing and what your room is. It may be too much for some people. You might think it's artificially coloring the music. I never really felt that way. I listened to a lot of songs. If the song was thin naturally, I preferred the Sony. If it wasn't, I preferred the other two. Can't go wrong with any of them, but there is a difference with that Sony having a much deeper bass. So I want to end on value. So while all three of these are top of the line receivers, they don't all cost the same. As a matter of fact, there's a wide variance. You can get the 60-watt Sony for probably about $500. You get the 110-watt Onkyo in the $700 range, and the 185-watt Pioneer is going to cost you between $2,000 and $3,000. So while the Pioneer looks great and is a great trophy to have sitting there, it is not a great value at all. The Onkyo sounds nearly identical and comes in at a fraction of the price. As a matter of fact, the Sony honestly is the best value because it comes in even less and sounds fantastic. So if you can pick a Sony up in the $500 range or less, I would do so. So check out my other comparison videos that I have on the channel and subscribe. You should get one about once a week. Thanks for watching.